I suppose most folks, when they think about their last will and testament, think about who gets the good china and who gets stuck with that lumpy old recliner. Me, I decided to leave my children something a little more challenging than a squabble over silverware. The day I had my lawyer, a stuffy but surprisingly game fellow named Arthur, notarize the single clause that would define my legacy, he blinked at me over his spectacles and asked, for the 10th time, "Eleanor, are you absolutely certain?" I just smiled. You see, my will states that my 3 children and 6 grandchildren will inherit my not insubstantial estate on one condition. And one condition only. They have to prove, unequivocally, that they truly love me. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Let's get this show on the road. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 68 years young, and for 45 of those years, I was married to the most wonderfully infuriating man on the planet, George. George was an engineer. That tells you about 90% of what you need to know about him. He was practical, logical, and believed that emotions were best expressed through a properly calibrated thermostat at a well-timed oil change for my station wagon. "The car's running smooth, Ellie," he'd say. That was George's version of a sonnet. He loved me, I know he did, but he showed it in kilowatts and quarterly maintenance, not poetry and passion. When he passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack on his beloved riding mower, a Viking top of the line, of course, he left me very, very comfortable. George wasn't just an engineer. He was an inventor. He held a patent on some tiny, ridiculously important gizmo that went into every microwave made after 1998. Every time someone reheats a slice of pizza, I get a check. It's not Oprah money, but it's certainly never fly coach again money. And with that money came my children. Oh, Lord, my children. They descended on my quiet, tidy home in suburban Ohio like a flock of well-dressed vultures. There's my eldest, Robert, a 50-year-old investment banker from Connecticut who communicates primarily through sighs of financial disappointment. He's married to Pamela, a woman who looks like her face might crack if she smiles too hard. Then there's Susan, my middle child, 47, living in California. She's a lifestyle influencer, which, as far as I can tell, means she takes pictures of expensive salads and writes captions like, "Live your truth." Her husband, Chad, has a man bun and sells artisanal driftwood. Last, there's my baby, Michael. 42, and bless his heart, still trying to find himself. He's an adjunct professor of Renaissance pottery, a field I'm reasonably sure he invented. He lives about 20 minutes away, which means he's close enough to bring me his laundry. After the funeral, after all the casseroles had been eaten and the sympathy cards filed away, the 3 of them sat me down in my own living room for what they called a family meeting. This was Robert's doing, of course. He had a briefcase to talk to his own mother. "Mother," Robert began, adjusting his tie like he was about to foreclose on my house, "we need to discuss the, disposition of assets." "The what?" I asked, taking a delicate sip of my sweet tea. "Your assets, Mother, the estate," he said, gesturing around my cozy, chintz-filled living room as if it were a derelict property. "Dad, George, handled everything. Now that responsibility falls to you, and, well," he trailed off, the implication hanging in the air like a bad smell. The implication was that I, little old Eleanor, who still used a flip phone and thought the cloud was where the rain came from, couldn't possibly manage. Susan jumped in, her voice dripping with that syrupy, patronizing tone she uses for her followers. "What Robbie is trying to say, Mom, is that we're here to help you. We can help you transition. Maybe look into a nice, if you say retirement community, Susan, I will take this half-empty pitcher of tea and baptize you with it," I said, my smile not wavering. Michael, bless him, tried to play peacemaker.
Mom, they don't mean anything by it. It's just you've got the house, the portfolio, the patents. It's a lot. I listened to them for an hour. They had plans. Oh, they had plans. Robert wanted to leverage my assets. Susan wanted me to sell the house and move to a gorgeous little bungalow near her in California, which I knew meant a beige stucco box with no yard, where I'd be roped into free babysitting for her 2 children, Ocean and Quinoa. Michael just wanted to make sure I knew he could totally use my old dad's workshop. Not once in that entire hour did a single one of them ask me how I was doing, how I was feeling. My George was gone. The quiet hum of his workshop in the garage was silenced. The other side of the bed was cold, and they were talking about portfolios and bungalows. It wasn't that I expected them to weep and wail for weeks, but a little tenderness? A simple, "How are you holding up, Mom?" seemed to be on them. They saw a resource, a bank account that had just lost its manager.
That was the moment the seed of my little plan was planted. For 45 years, I'd been the quiet, steady support system. I was the keeper of schedules, the baker of birthday cakes, the nurse for fevers, the unpaid therapist, the checkbook balancer, the chief operating officer of the Vance family. And I was now being told to my face that I was incompetent, overlooked. It was time for a little recalibration of my own. So I did what any intelligent woman of my generation would do. I played the part they assigned me. "Oh, you're right," I said, dabbing a fake tear from my eye with the back of my hand. "It's all so overwhelming. I don't know what I'd do without you 3. Their collective posture changed. They leaned in, smelling victory. "Of course, Mother," Robert said, his voice softening now that he had a problem to manage. For the next year, I let them think they were in charge. I'd call Robert and ask him painfully simple questions about bank statements. I let Susan fly out and redecorate the guest room in 50 shades of greige. I even let Michael store his entire unsold collection of lopsided ceramic mugs in my basement. They were happy. They were placated. They thought dear old Mom was a doddering, harmless old lady who would soon sign everything over to their capable hands. They forgot who raised them. They forgot I was the one who could find a lost retainer in a landfill, who could negotiate a car deal down to the floor mats, and who ran the most successful bake sale the PTA had ever seen for 8 years running by sheer force of will and a secret recipe for lemon bars. I wasn't doddering. I was observing. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The catalyst was my 68th birthday. Robert and Pamela sent a flower arrangement that looked like something you'd see at a mobster's funeral, and a card signed by his assistant. Susan posted a grainy photo of me from 1997 on her Instagram with a long, rambling caption about the sacred bond between mothers and daughters that tagged no fewer than 15 brands of organic sunscreen. It got 3,000 likes. Michael called me 2 days late to say he'd almost finished crafting my gift, a hand-thrown something. I'm still not sure what it is. It looks like a beige snail with a handle. No one visited. No one offered to take me to dinner. It was just a series of perfunctory, box-ticking gestures. That night, alone in the quiet house with just my old tabby cat Earl for company, I didn't feel sad. I felt a clarifying, righteous anger. The love I'd poured out for decades had been met with convenience, obligation. The affection they showed was entirely transactional. So, the next day, I called Arthur, my lawyer. "Arthur," I said, "I want to change my will. And I have an idea that I think you'll find amusing." Arthur, to his credit, heard the whole thing without interrupting. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing.
Finally, he said, "Eleanor, this is unorthodox. It's brilliant, but it's going to be a complete and utter circus." "I know," I replied, feeling a grin spread across my face for the first time in days. "I'm counting on it. I'll bring the popcorn." The first phase was simple. I let it be known through casual conversation that I'd had my will finalized. The family's antennae went up immediately. Robert called. "Mother, you should have consulted me. Wills can have serious tax implications if not structured properly." What he meant was, "How much am I getting?" Susan called. "Oh, Mom, that's so morbid, but also so responsible. Did you remember my foundation for disenfranchised feral cats in the tri-state area?" What she meant was, "How much am I getting?" Michael dropped by with his laundry. "Oh, well, cool. Hey, Dad's old convertible is just sitting in the garage." What he meant was obvious. I was vague with all of them. "Oh, it's all taken care of, dear. Arthur handled everything. Don't you worry your pretty little head." This, of course, drove them insane. The mystery was the first little twist of the knife. I let them simmer in it for a good 6 months, and then I decided to detonate the bomb. I announced I was hosting a family dinner. A mandatory one. "Big news to share," I said in my group text. The replies were instant. Suddenly, everyone's schedule was wide open. I cooked George's favorite meal. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top. The whole 9 yards. I set the dining room table with the good silver and the wedding china they were all so concerned about.
They arrived looking like a firing squad, all fake smiles and tense shoulders. Robert was checking stock prices on his phone under the table. Susan was taking a picture of her plate for a future post with the hashtag #RetroEats. Michael was trying to explain to Chad why my classic solid oak dining table was inauthentically bourgeois. I let them get a good meal in them first, soften them up. Then, as I served the apple pie, I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "As you know, I recently finalized my estate planning. I've given a copy of the pertinent clause to Arthur, and I wanted to share my decision with all of you tonight." 6 pairs of eyes locked on me. Even Chad put down his phone. The air was thick with greed. "It's very simple," I said, taking a slow, deliberate bite of my pie. I let them wait. "George and I were blessed with a comfortable life, and I intend to pass that blessing on to you." I saw Robert's shoulders relax a fraction. "However," I continued, "I am adding one condition to my will. It's not about money or percentages or assets. It's about motivation." I looked each one of them in the eye. "My entire estate, down to the last penny and the last lopsided ceramic mug, will be divided equally among those of you who can prove, to the satisfaction of a neutral third-party arbiter, that you truly love me." The silence that fell over the dining room was thick enough to carve. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound was the gentle hum of my refrigerator and my old cat, Earl, purring on the rug. Chad's man bun seemed to droop a little. Pamela looked at Robert, her perfectly plucked eyebrows raised so high they were nearing her hairline. Quinoa and Ocean, Susan's kids, who had been glued to their iPads, even looked up. Robert, bless his predictable, high-strung heart, was the first to speak. He let out a short, choked sound that was half laugh, half gasp. "Mother, that's absurd. You can't be serious. That's not legally enforceable." "Oh, it's very enforceable, dear," I said calmly, taking another bite of pie. "Arthur assures me the language is ironclad. It's a testamentary conditional bequest. The condition," I beamed at him, "is love." Susan finally found her voice. It was several octaves higher than usual. Love? What does that even mean? How do you prove love? Is there, like, a metric? A rubric? Are we submitting a portfolio? She was already trying to strategize the presentation, the optics of it all. Michael just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. So, this is a test? Not a test, sweetie. An opportunity. I corrected him gently. An opportunity for you all to do a little soul-searching and show your dear old mother you care about something more than her bank balance. The room devolved into chaos. Robert was already muttering about challenging the will on grounds of diminished capacity, a threat that made me laugh out loud. Susan was frantically scrolling through her phone, probably searching for how to monetize filial piety. Michael was just shaking his head, mumbling, "This is nuts. This is completely nuts." "And who is this arbiter?" Robert demanded, his face turning a blotchy red. "Who is this person who gets to decide?" "Ah, yes, the arbiter," I said, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret. "I have hired an independent third-party professional. They are a retired family court judge with decades of experience in assessing messy family dynamics. Judge Morrison. She will receive reports and evidence from my lawyer, Arthur. She has full discretion. Her decision is final and binding." This information landed like another bomb. A retired judge. This wasn't some silly whim. This was a structured, quasi-legal proceeding. I had taken their inheritance and turned it into a court case where they were the defendants and their own character was on trial. "Evidence?" Susan shrieked. "What kind of evidence? Do I have to get affidavits, film, testimonials?" "Whatever you think best demonstrates genuine, unprompted affection, dear," I said sweetly. "Judge Morrison is very wise. I'm sure she'll be able to tell the difference between a heartfelt gesture and a performance." The dinner party ended shortly after that. They left in a flurry of muttered excuses and panicked energy, leaving behind a table of half-eaten dessert and shattered expectations. I sat in the quiet of my dining room for a long time, sipping my decaf coffee and stroking Earl's soft fur. For the first time since George died, I didn't feel like a relic or a responsibility. I felt like the queen on a chessboard, and all the other pieces were finally being forced to play my game. The attempts started within 48 hours. They were, in one word, pathetic. Robert's approach was purely financial, of course. He didn't come himself. Instead, a sleek silver sedan pulled into my driveway and outstepped a young woman in a severe pantsuit. She introduced herself as a senior lifestyle concierge from a wealth management firm. Her job, she explained, was to optimize my elder years. She presented me with a binder full of brochures for Caribbean cruises, for one, home elevator installations, and a service that delivers pre-portioned vitamin-enriched meals that looked like astronaut food.
"Mr. Vance wants to ensure you have the best of everything, Mrs. Vance," she said with a plastic smile. "Did he happen to send along a nice handwritten card telling me he loves me?" I asked, flipping through a brochure for a walk-in bathtub. The concierge blinked. The concierge package is the expression of his sentiment, Mrs. Vance. "Well, then you can tell my son that his sentiment has been duly noted and filed directly into my recycling bin," I said, showing her the door. I told Arthur to submit the brochure for the walk-in tub as Robert's Exhibit A. Susan, on the other hand, went for a full-on media assault. She drove down from California with Chad and the kids in their electric SUV, announcing they were there to spend quality time with me. What this actually meant was she followed me around with her phone for 2 days, documenting everything for her social media channels. It started with a post of a selfie with me on the porch swing. I looked dazed. She was flashing a brilliant white smile. The caption, "Reconnecting with my roots and my incredible mom. She is the OG influencer in my life, teaching me everything about grace and strength. Hashtag family is everything. Hashtag mom love. Hashtag wisdom." The next day, she decided we were going to bake my famous lemon bars, just like old times. She set up a tripod in the kitchen and live-streamed the entire thing. Of course, she'd never baked a thing in her life. She got flour on her yoga pans, mistook salt for sugar, and spent most of the time talking to her followers while I did all the actual work. "Mom, isn't this fun?" she'd ask, posing with a whisk while I was elbow-deep in sticky dough. I was a prop in her one-woman show. The resulting lemon bars were inedible, but the video got 12,000 views. Arthur submitted the clip of Susan asking me if zesting was a type of yoga pose as Susan's Exhibit A. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Michael's attempt was, in its own way, the most sincere and the most misguided of all. He showed up one afternoon with a toolbox. "Mom," he announced grandly, "I am here to do all those little handyman jobs Dad used to do, to show you I can be the man of the house now." My heart, for a fleeting second, softened. Maybe Michael, my baby, actually got it. My optimism lasted until he tried to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen sink. An hour later, my entire kitchen floor was under an inch of water, the shutoff valve was mysteriously broken, and Michael was on his phone trying to figure out if YouTube tutorials for plumbing were a reliable source. I had to call a professional plumber who charged me $300 for an emergency weekend call-out. Michael's Exhibit A was a photograph of the plumber's bill, which I paid. A week later, I received the first progress report from Arthur. Judge Morrison was, to put it mildly, unimpressed. Arthur told me her exact words were, "So far, Mrs. Vance's children have demonstrated that one sees her as a balance sheet, one as a content generator, and the third as a convenient place to break things. The current frontrunner for the inheritance is the cat." The kids must have gotten a similar report because things began to escalate. The era of competitive affection began. The next Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of a lawnmower. But it wasn't just one. Robert had flown in from Connecticut and was grimly pushing my mower across the front lawn, still wearing his Italian loafers. An hour later, Michael showed up with a rented power washer and started blasting the grime off my back patio with a vengeance. They worked in stony silence, occasionally glaring at each other over the rose bushes. Susan, not to be outdone by manual labor, arrived around noon with a team of professional gardeners. "Mom, you shouldn't have to lift a finger," she declared, as 3 burly men started ripping out my perfectly healthy petunias to install more drought-tolerant, aesthetically pleasing native grasses. By the end of the day, my front lawn was mowed into uneven stripes, my back patio was so clean it was blinding, and my flower beds looked like they'd been scalped. The 3 of them stood in my driveway, sweating and dirty, trying to outsmile each other. It was becoming a spectator sport. My neighbors started bringing out lawn chairs. Betty from across the street asked if I was selling tickets. The problem was, none of it was for me. It was for them. They were like toddlers screaming, "Look at me! Look what I can do!" All for a gold star from the judge. They still hadn't figured out that I wasn't the audience. I was supposed to be the reason. And they were failing, miserably and spectacularly. I was starting to enjoy myself immensely. The war of the yard work was a bust, at least for my children. For me, it was a source of endless entertainment, and for my neighbor Betty, it was better than her daytime soaps. I had Arthur submit a full photo portfolio of the day's events to Judge Morrison. He included pictures of Robert's mud-caked loafers, the bald patches in my garden where the native grasses were planted, and a close-up of the streaks Michael's power washer had left on the siding. The judge's feedback relayed by Arthur over the phone was concise. "This is not love. This is competitive landscaping. The cat's lead is widening."
Evidently, a similar message got back to my children because their tactics shifted. The manual labor phase was over. Now, they were going to try and prove not just that they could do things for me, but that they knew me. This was destined to be even more disastrous. Susan was up first. She called me, her voice radiating the kind of false enthusiasm you only hear from telemarketers and cult leaders. "Mom, I had the most amazing idea. It's an authenticity project." "That sounds sticky," I said, stirring my iced tea. "No, silly. It's about getting back to our core memories. I found that old photo of us at Miller's Pond, from when I was about 10. You're wearing that yellow sundress, and I'm holding that half-eaten cotton candy. It's the perfect image of mother-daughter love." I vaguely remembered the picture. I mostly remembered that the cotton candy had attracted a swarm of yellow jackets, and I'd spent the afternoon terrified she was going to go into anaphylactic shock. "What about it, dear?" "We're going to recreate it," she announced, "exactly as it was. It will be a testament to our enduring bond, a temporal visual representation of our connection." A temporal visual representation? Lord, give me strength. A few days later, she showed up with Chad and the kids, who look even more miserable than usual. Susan had a bag from some vintage clothing store. She pulled out a flimsy mustard yellow dress that looked like a sick canary. "Here," she said, shoving it at me. "It's almost identical." "Susan, my dear," I said, holding up the tiny garment, "this is a size 6. I have not been a size 6 since the Carter administration." Her face fell for a second before the plastic smile returned. "Oh, well, just hold it in front of you. It's the idea that counts." We drove out to Miller's Pond. It had changed. The old wooden dock was gone, replaced by a concrete pier. The charming little concession stand was now a soulless snack bar selling gluten-free tailed chips. Susan was undeterred. She positioned me by the water, forcing me to hold the tiny yellow dress against my chest like a paper doll. She handed her daughter Quinoa a bag of bright blue cotton candy, which Quinoa immediately began to devour. "Okay, now look at me with loving nostalgia," she directed, fiddling with her phone's camera settings. "Chad, can you get the lighting right? I want that golden hour glow." I did my best to look nostalgic, which mostly involved me squinting at the sun. Quinoa, high on sugar, started running in circles around us. Chad tripped over a fishing line. It was a circus. "Now, let's capture the spontaneity," she said, which is a phrase that has never once resulted in a spontaneous moment. "Quinoa, go give Grandma a big hug, just like you adore her." Quinoa, with a face now completely smeared with blue sugar, ran at me full tilt and buried his sticky face into my stomach. I now had blue goo all over my blouse and was holding a dress fit for a teenager. This, apparently, was the money shot. Susan looked at the photo on her phone and beamed. "Perfect! The raw emotion. Judge Morrison will love this." I had Arthur submit Susan's picture as Exhibit C. For contrast, I had him also submit the original photo from 35 years ago. In the old one, I'm genuinely smiling because my little girl was happy. In the new one, I look like a hostage being forced to participate in a modern art project. Next up was Robert. His strategy, a pivot from his wallet, was to weaponize his calendar. He was going to spend quality scheduled time with me. He called and informed me, did not ask me, that he would be picking me up at 10 a.m. the following Saturday. Clear your schedule, Mother. We have an 8-hour block reserved for bonding. He arrived precisely at 10 a.m., wearing a crisp polo shirt and a Bluetooth headset that never left his ear. He had a laminated itinerary. I'm not making that up. 10 a.m. to 11:30, scenic drive and discussion of current events, he announced as I got into his terrifyingly quiet luxury car. The discussion consisted of him taking 3 business calls on his headset while I watched the trees go by. 11:30 to 12:45, farmers market procurement, he read. We went to the local farmers market, an activity I usually enjoy. With Robert, it was a military exercise. He strode through the stalls, pointing at things. 1 basket of those organic tomatoes, a bunch of that kale. Mother, do you require artisanal jam? We have a 6-minute window for condiments. He was trying to buy affection the same way he bought stocks. Efficiently and with no emotional investment. He kept checking his watch as if we might miss the closing bell on zucchini. The highlight of the day was lunch, listed on the itinerary as 13 to 14:15 shared nutritional intake. He took me to a sterile white restaurant where the menu was full of words like foam and deconstructed. He ordered for both of us. We ate in near silence, a silence punctuated by the furious clicking of his thumbs on his phone as he answered emails under the table. He was physically present, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, probably in a spreadsheet somewhere. He thought he was being generous. He had carved out an entire day just for me. He'd taken time away from his precious work to supervise my activities. What he didn't realize is that love isn't an appointment you can pencil into your schedule. It's the easy, unplanned silence. It's laughing at a dumb joke. It's calling just to say hello, not to check a box. They were trying everything they could think of, except the one thing that would have actually worked. And Michael? Oh, bless his heart. His attempt was going to be the masterpiece of this whole circus. You won't want to miss this.
As Robert dropped me off, exactly at 1800 hours, 6 o'clock, as the itinerary promised, he gave me a brisk pat on the shoulder. A very productive day, Mother. I trust this demonstrates a significant commitment. He sounded like he was concluding a board meeting. I had Arthur send the laminated itinerary and a photo of Robert ignoring me during lunch to the judge. Exhibit D. Finally, it was Michael's turn. He'd been quiet for a couple of weeks, and I was getting worried. But then he showed up at my door, his eyes wild with artistic fervor. "Mom," he breathed, "it's come to me, my tribute. The ultimate expression of our bond. I am going to sculpt you." "Oh, Michael," I said, "that's flattering, but I'm not much for sitting still." No, not a traditional bust," he said, waving his hands dismissively. "I am going to capture your essence, your spirit, your very soul in clay." This was going to be 1,000 times worse than a traditional bust. For the next week, he was an artist in residence in Dad's old workshop. He'd occasionally come into the house to observe your form or ask me questions like, "Mother, if your internal emotional landscape were a color, would it be more of a burnt umber or a frantic cerulean?" I told him it was probably more of a nice, calm beige, which disappointed him greatly. The day of the great unveiling arrived. He'd invited Robert and Susan over to witness it. He had a sheet draped over a lumpy object in the middle of the living room. "For you, Mother," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I call it progenitor." He whipped the sheet off with a flourish. We all stared. The thing on the pedestal was a twisted, lumpy column of terracotta clay about 4 feet tall. Sticking out of it at odd angles were various objects, a broken fork, the cracked face of a clock, a bird's feather, and what looked suspiciously like the handle from his beige snail mug. At the very top, there were 2 indents that I suppose were meant to be eyes. It looked like a totem pole assembled by a hyperactive toddler during an earthquake. I began, genuinely speechless. It symbolizes the fractured yet resilient nature of the maternal figure in a post-industrial society, Michael declared, proudly. The fork is your nourishment. The clock is the passage of time. The feather is your fleeting dreams. Robert just stared, his face a perfect mask of horror. "Michael, you can't be serious. You're going to give Mother a nightmare." Susan, however, saw an angle. She whipped out her phone. "It's, challenging. It's provocative. This is brilliant, Mikey. It's so raw, so vulnerable. #ArtMom, #ClayEmotions." Michael beamed, vindicated. They started arguing about the symbolic meaning of the embedded barbage. I just patted the lumpy clay head. "It's very unique, dear." Exhibit E was in the bag. They'd had their turn. They'd tried money, nostalgia, time, and art. And every single one of them had managed to make it about themselves. The judge's reports were growing more and more sarcastic. My lead on the cat was holding steady, but not by much. Then came the next phase, the one I hadn't anticipated. If they couldn't win me over themselves, they would send in surrogates. They were about to unleash the grandchildren. The arrival of the grandchildren was not so much a charm offensive as it was a series of tactical deployments. They were tiny, unwitting soldiers in their parents' war for my money, and they each bore the unmistakable stamp of their commanders. First came Robert's platoon, my eldest grandchildren, Tyler, 17, and Ashley, 15. They lived in a world of prep schools, polo lessons, and unrelenting pressure to build their resumes. They arrived one Saturday morning, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly utility bills. Robert didn't come in. He just dropped them at the curb like he was delivering a package. Tyler, a carbon copy of his father in miniature, shook my hand. He didn't hug me. He shook my hand. "Grandmother Eleanor," he said, his voice as starched as his collar, "we have prepared a multi-platform presentation." Ashley, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, produced an iPad. "It's a PowerPoint," she said flatly, "with a supplemental video montage." For the next 20 minutes, I sat on my own sofa and was formally presented with a slideshow titled Eleanor Vance, an Analysis of a Matriarch's Value. It included bullet points on my contributions to family stability, a bar graph illustrating the frequency of their past holiday visits, low, and pie charts detailing my known hobbies. Tyler narrated with the dry enthusiasm of an earnings call, while Ashley clicked through the slides. The grand finale was the video montage. It was a collection of photos of me from their childhood set to a sappy, generic piano score. But every picture was of me doing something for them, tying Tyler's shoe, pushing Ashley on a swing, serving them birthday cake. It wasn't an expression of love, it was an itemized invoice of my grandmotherly duties. When it was over, they both looked at me expectantly. "So," Tyler said, "was that sufficient evidence?" "It was certainly thorough, dear," I managed to say. "Would you like some cookies?" "Thank you, but we can't," Ashley said, looking at her phone. "Father has us scheduled for a Mandarin tutoring session in 45 minutes. He's tracking our location." They were gone as quickly as they'd appeared, efficient, sterile,
and utterly loveless. I called Arthur. Exhibit F, I told him, is a PowerPoint presentation that makes me look like a retiring department manager. I hope the judge is having a good laugh.
Next to enter the fray were Susan's darlings, 8-year-old Ocean and 6-year-old Quinoa. Where Tyler and Ashley were programmed, Ocean and Quinoa were feral. Susan's parenting style was to let them express their authentic selves, which meant they had the manners of rabid squirrels. She didn't just drop them off. She came in with her phone, already recording. "We're going to give Grandma the gift of creative joy," she narrated for her followers. The gift was a giant canvas and several bags of eco-friendly, non-toxic finger paints. The plan was for them to paint a mural of love for my living room wall. What followed was not art. It was vandalism. Within 10 minutes, there was more paint on my carpet, my furniture, and my pet, Earl, than on the canvas. Ocean decided that flinging brown paint was his highest form of expression. Quinoa, in a moment of artistic discovery, learned that she could make footprints by stepping in the paint tray and walking across my heartwood floors. Susan just filmed it all, cooing, "Look at them! Unfettered creativity! This is what pure, unadulterated love looks like, people! It's messy and beautiful." It was certainly messy. Earl, who was now a fetching shade of blue, took refuge on top of the china cabinet, from which he glared down at the proceedings like a vengeful sapphire god. At one point, in a misguided attempt to collaborate with me, Quinoa wiped her green, sticky hands all over my slacks. And after an hour, my living room looked like a paintball arena had exploded. The canvas was a smear of muddy brown. And the children, bored with their creative joy, were now trying to see if the TV remote would float in the toilet. "Isn't it magnificent?" Susan asked, gesturing to the chaos. "It's from the heart." "It's certainly from somewhere, dear," I said, plucking a paint-soaked leaf out of my hair. I paid a professional cleaning service $500 to undo the gift of creative joy. I sent Judge Morrison the bill, along with a before and after photo of my living room and my cat. The judge's note back was a single sentence. "In the case of Vance versus Vance, I find for the plaintiff, Earl the cat." Finally came Michael's children, Leo and Maya. In some ways, their attempt was the most heartbreaking. They were sweet kids, and unlike their cousins, they didn't seem to be performing. Michael's plan was that they would spend the day with me and help me. They tried to help me bake cookies and added a cup of salt. They tried to help me garden and pulled up all my prize-winning hydrangeas, thinking they were weeds. They tried to, quote, organize my bookshelf and ended up creating a leaning tower of paperbacks that collapsed when Earl brushed against it. They were disasters, but they were well-intentioned disasters. They hugged me, they told me my salt cookies were delicious, while grimacing, and they drew me pictures that I actually wanted to hang on my refrigerator. But here was the problem. Michael just dropped them off and disappeared for 8 hours. He used the "prove you love grandma" clause as a convenient excuse for free daycare so he could go to his pottery studio. The affection from the kids was genuine, but the motivation of their father was as cynical as his siblings. It was so awful. I didn't have the heart to submit the children's failed efforts to the judge. Instead, I sent a copy of a text message Michael sent me in the middle of the day. "Are they behaving? This is great for my portfolio, right? A whole day of grandparent-grandchild bonding?" He didn't ask if I was enjoying it. He didn't ask if I was tired. He just wanted to know if his gambit was working. It was so disgusting. They had thrown everything at the wall. Money, time, art, even their own children, and nothing was sticking. But they had one more card to play, one they thought was their ace in the hole. Don't go anywhere, because this is where it gets really ugly. The failure of the grandchild gambit marked a turning point. They had exhausted all attempts at showing love, however clumsily. Their reserves of performative affection were empty. So they pivoted to a new
darker strategy. If they couldn't prove their own love, they would simply disprove everyone else's. The sabotage began. Robert went first, of course. His methods were corporate and cold-blooded. One evening, Arthur called me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave, "I've received a dossier." "A dossier, Arthur? Are we in a spy movie now?" "It's from Robert's lawyer. It's an opposition research file on Susan and Michael. He's hired a private investigator." The file, which Arthur read parts of to me over the phone, was petty and vicious. It contained Susan's credit card statements, highlighting extravagant purchases at spas and boutiques in Los Angeles. The implication was clear. How could she truly care about her dear old mother when she was spending thousands on herself? It included Michael's student loan records and his dismal adjunct professor's salary, framing him as a financial leech just waiting to suck the estate dry. It was a character assassination presented with the soulless detachment of a quarterly report. Susan, naturally, fought back on her turf, social media. She started a series of passive-aggressive posts. One was a picture of a sunset with the caption, "Watching the sun go down and thinking about what's truly important in life. Hint, it's not stock portfolios or leveraged buyouts. Some people have forgotten how to have a soul. #family values. #so sad." Another was a picture of her helping quinoa with a craft project, captioned, "Teaching my kids that the best gifts come from the hands and the heart, not from a trust fund." Some people use their children to make art. Others just use them as pawns in their financial games. #priorities. #real love. It was a masterclass in smiling, public backstabbing.
Michael's retaliation was less sophisticated but no less hostile. He started calling me to warn me about his siblings. "Mom, you know Robert's only doing this because he's terrified of losing control," he'd say. "He doesn't feel emotions, he just calculates them." Or, "Be careful with Susan, Mom. She lives her whole life through a filter. It's all fake. Nothing she does is real." He was trying to poison the well, one clumsy conversation at a time. My home, which should have been a place of comfort, had become the neutral territory in a Cold War. The phone would ring and I'd have to brace myself for which child would be on the other end, ready to launch a fresh volley against their siblings. They were so consumed with invalidating each other's efforts that they had stopped making any efforts of their own. They didn't call to ask how I was. They called to tell me how awful their brother or sister was. The whole thing reached its absurd peak one Tuesday afternoon. A package arrived. It was a large, edible arrangement, that bizarre fruit on a stick bouquet. The card read, "Thinking of you, Mom. Love, Susan." An hour later, my doorbell rang again. It was a delivery man with a massive basket of cheeses and crackers from a gourmet shop. "With love, from Robert." Not 30 minutes after that, Michael showed up in person holding a single, slightly wilted rose from his own garden. They were all trying to plant their flag on my doorstep to mark their territory. Their gifts weren't gifts, they were competing press releases. I looked at the fruit, the cheese, and the sad rose lined up on my kitchen counter. They were fighting over my money with cheap sentiment and mail-order affection, and I suddenly felt profoundly tired. The game had been fun for a while, but watching my children tear each other apart was curdling my victory into something sour. It proved I was right, but it also proved how deeply I had failed somewhere along the line. The battle royale was in full swing, and my quiet suburban home had become the arena. But a funny thing happened while they were so busy tearing each other down. They all forgot about one key player, me. And I was about to make my next move. That night, I made a decision. It was time to stop being a passive observer. It was time to remind them that this wasn't about them and their squabbles. It was about me. So on a Wednesday morning, I packed a small overnight bag. I put my phone on the kitchen counter, turned it off, and placed a single sealed envelope next to it. Inside the envelope was a note with just 3 words: "I've gone away." Then I walked out to my car, got in, and drove. I had no destination in mind, just a need for some distance. I ended up in a charming little town a few hours away, checked into a cozy bed and breakfast, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I had just lobbed a grenade into the middle of their Cold War. Now I just had to wait and see what would happen when it exploded. Would they call the police because they were worried for my safety? Or would they just call their lawyers, worried for their inheritance? Their reaction to my absence would be the truest evidence of all. My impromptu vacation lasted for 3 blissful days. I stayed in a lovely little place with floral wallpaper and a proprietor who served the most heavenly blueberry scones for breakfast. I read 2 paperback novels from cover to cover, took long walks by a creek, and did not think about assets, heirs, or lumpy sculptures once. My only contact with the outside world was a quick call to Arthur from the payphone in the center of town. Yes, they still exist. "Eleanor, are you all right?" he asked, his professional calm frayed with genuine concern. "I'm more than all right, Arthur. I'm scones and a good book all right," I told him. "Just tell me, has the grenade gone off yet?" "My dear woman," he chuckled, "the crater is still smoking." It had, of course, been Michael who found the note. He'd come over to drop off his laundry. Some things, not even the promise of millions, can change. He told Arthur later that he'd felt a primal sense of dread upon finding the house empty and the phone on the counter. His primal sense of dread led him not to call the police, but to call Robert. The conference call that followed, which Arthur later described to me with glee, was a masterpiece of selfishness. "She's gone," Michael wailed. "Just gone. The note says, 'I've gone away,' that's it. What if she's hurt? What if she's been taken?" "Now let's not be dramatic, Michael," Robert had cut in, his voice all business. "The first rule of crisis management is to control the narrative. We do not call the police. A missing persons report will trigger a public record, which could be accessed by the media. I don't need eccentric widow vanishes amidst family inheritance dispute hitting the Wall Street Journal." "The media!" Susan shrieked. "Robert, that's the best idea you've had. This is a human interest story. Devoted children search for beloved mother. I can start a social media campaign, a hashtag bring Eleanor home. I could go on Good Morning America. Think of the exposure for the Cat Foundation." "Will you both stop it?" Michael shouted. "This isn't a stock price or a TV appearance. This is Mom. She could be wandering around with amnesia or something." "Or," Robert countered coolly, "this is another of her ridiculous tests. She's manipulating us." That was the conclusion they finally settled on. They convinced themselves that I was hiding somewhere nearby, watching and judging their reaction. This wasn't a crisis, it was a pop quiz, and they were determined to ace it. So for the next 48 hours, they launched the most insincere, public, and performative search party in human history. Susan created the hashtag, which trended locally for about 3 hours, thanks to an army of bots she probably paid for. She posted a tearful video to Instagram, shot in 5 takes according to her own daughter, Ashley, who later tattled to me, begging for my safe return. Robert, meanwhile, used his corporate resources. He had a team of his junior analysts create a probability map of my most likely locations based on my credit card history and past travel patterns. They apparently spent an entire workday cross-referencing bed and breakfasts with quilting shops within a 200-mile radius. Michael organized a neighborhood search party, which mostly consisted of him and a few of my bewildered but well-meaning neighbors knocking on doors, turning my disappearance into a town spectacle.
They covered all the bases of what looked like concern. They papered the town with missing posters that featured Susan's overly filtered selfie of us at Miller's Pond. They gave a joint interview to the local news, where they all held hands and talked about what a cherished, if eccentric, mother I was. It was a beautiful pantomime of a loving, worried family. But Arthur knew the truth. Because in between every public-facing act, they were individually bombarding his office with frantic calls. "Is my search effort scoring points with the judge?" Susan wanted to know. "Does my strategic deployment of personnel demonstrate executive leadership in a crisis?" Robert asked. "Do you think I seem like the most caring one?" Michael pleaded. Arthur, following my instructions, told them all the same thing. "I have no information regarding Mrs. Vance's whereabouts or her state of mind. All relevant actions are being noted." He was, in effect, taking notes for their final exam, and they were all failing in spectacular fashion. The search for me was never about my safety. It was about outperforming each other one last time. It was the grand finale of their competitive griefing, the final, desperate grab for the prize. On the third day, their panic began to curdle into rage. They hadn't found me, their performances were yielding no results, and the judge, via Arthur, remained silent. Their fragile alliance born of a common goal shattered. They descended on Arthur's oak-paneled office together, an angry mob in designer clothing. "This has gone on long enough, Arthur," Robert had thundered, planting his hands on the lawyer's mahogany desk. "Where is she? This whole charade is legally questionable, and I am this close to having you sanctioned for elder manipulation." "My mother is a vulnerable woman," Susan had cried, already getting her phone ready to record the confrontation. "We're worried sick," Michael had added, although he mostly just looked exhausted. And that's when Arthur, my wonderfully stuffy, game, and loyal lawyer, played my final card. "My clients," he said, and you could hear the satisfaction in his voice when he recounted this to me, "have done no such thing." "Clients, plural? Who's your other client?" He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Arthur let the question hang in the air for a long moment, enjoying their confusion. He then swiveled his large leather chair to face his credenza and picked up the speakerphone. With a calm, deliberate motion, he pressed a button. "You can say hello, Earl," he said into the phone. A loud, distinctly irritated meow echoed through the speaker. My children were dumbstruck. That's Mom's cat," Michael stammered. "Indeed," Arthur said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Earl is my other client. Per your mother's instructions, in the event of an emergency, Earl was retrieved from her home by a trusted pet sitter the morning of her departure. He is safe, comfortable, and has been enjoying a steady diet of high-end, grain-free salmon pâté. I've been managing his affairs." The sheer, glorious absurdity of the statement sucked all the air out of the room. They had spent 3 days creating a public circus, convinced they were the stars of the show. To find out that the cat had a better executed contingency plan than they did? The cat was more important. The cat's well-being had been prioritized. "As for your mother," Arthur continued, his tone shifting from amused to ice-cold, "she is perfectly safe. She has been on a small, well-deserved holiday. She simply wanted to see what would happen if the bank account, the assets, and the source of all the contention disappeared for a while. She wanted to know if any of you loved Eleanor Vance, the woman, your mother, or if you only loved the idea of what she could leave you. She wondered if your first call would be to 911 or to your lawyer, if your first thought would be for her safety or for the status of the competition.
She let that sink in. Over the past many months, you have provided your evidence. You have given your testimony. And in these past 3 days, you have given your closing arguments. Judge Morrison has reached her verdict. At that exact moment, the door to Arthur's office opened, and in walked I, looking tanned, rested, and holding a small box of blueberry scones. "Hello, children," I said, my voice cheerful. "Did I miss anything?"
Their faces were a study in shock, fury, and humiliation. For the first time in a very, very long time, all 3 of them were completely speechless. This wasn't a test they could study for. It wasn't a project they could manage or a picture they could post. This was the simple, unvarnished truth, and it was a judgment on them, by them. The grand experiment was over. It was time to read the will. If you made it this far, comment with what you would have done in my place. It's always so fascinating to hear different perspectives. And now for the grand finale, the part you've all been waiting for. The journey back from the bed and breakfast had been a quiet, contemplative one. I'd practiced what I was going to say. I had my expression of serene disappointment perfected. But seeing the 3 of them there, standing in Arthur's office, looking like they'd just seen a ghost, my composure almost cracked. Not with sadness, but with a giddy, bubbling desire to laugh. Robert's jaw was literally hanging open. Susan had forgotten all about her phone. Her hands were clasped over her mouth. Michael just looked like a sad, lost little boy. "The scones are blueberry," I said, placing the box on the edge of Arthur's desk. I thought we could all use a little something sweet. Robert was the first to find his voice. It was a strangled whisper. "Mother, you were gone." 3 days, Robert, I said calmly. I took a 3-day vacation. Something I believe you refer to as a long weekend. The difference is I didn't take my phone. "But the note, the search," Susan cried again, finding her flair for the dramatic. "We were terrified. We thought something awful had happened to you." "Did you?" I asked, my voice soft but clear. "Or did you think something awful had happened to your inheritance? Because from what Arthur tells me, your primary concern seemed to be how your performance of terror was playing with the judge." That hit home. All 3 of them had to grace to look ashamed, their eyes darting away from mine. "You have all submitted your evidence," I said, taking a seat beside Arthur's desk. I was no longer the defendant or the doddering old fool. I was the one in charge. "Robert, you demonstrated that your love is quantifiable, best expressed through financial packages and laminated itineraries. Susan, your love is a brand, a hashtag, something to be curated for an audience. And Michael, your love is a monument to your own artistic ambition. You all tried to show love, but you forgot the most important part. You forgot to make it about me." I let the silence hang there heavy and suffocating. "Arthur," I said, turning to him, "the verdict, if you please." Arthur cleared his throat, put on his reading glasses, and picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk. "This is a summary of Judge Morrison's findings," he said in his formal courtroom voice. "After a thorough review of the evidence submitted by Robert Vance, Susan Vance Chambers, and Michael Vance, herein referred to as the heirs, it is the determination of this arbitrator that none have successfully met the condition set forth in the testamentary clause." He paused to let them absorb the blow. "The heirs' actions, while often elaborate and costly," he read, "have been consistently performative and self-serving. They have treated the condition not as an invitation to genuine emotional connection, but as a competition to be won. The arbitrator notes a pervasive lack of sincerity, empathy, and simple human kindness. Conversely, the family cat, Earl, has demonstrated consistent, non-transactional affection,
purring, and a comforting physical presence without any expectation of financial reward. Therefore, if the clause were to be enforced as written, the arbitrator would find in favor of the cat. Michael made a small squeaking sound. "And now for the big surprise," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "Arthur, would you please bring out my actual last will and testament, the one I signed 6 months ago?" Arthur reached into his desk drawer and produced another, thicker document bound in a crisp blue cover. What is that?" Robert asked, his eyes wide open. "That, dear, is my real will, the whole prove you love me clause. That was never legally binding. It was a little experiment, a moral aptitude test, if you will. And you all failed spectacularly. The purpose was never to disinherit you. It was to wake you up, to make you see that your mother is a person, not a trust fund." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the street. "For years I've watched the three of you drift further and further away, so caught up in your own lives that you forgot where you came from. You took me for granted. You took our family for granted. I decided it was time to issue a correction." I turned back to them. "So, here's what's going to happen. Arthur is now going to read you the terms of my actual will and testament, the rules I'm leaving behind." For the next 10 minutes, Arthur read, and with every clause, another layer of their smug certainty was stripped away. First, to my beloved cat Earl, a trust fund of $100,000 was to be established to provide for his lifetime care, including but not limited to weekly deliveries of salmon pâté, quarterly grooming appointments, and the retention of his preferred pet sitter, Mrs. Gable, down the street. Second, a donation of $1 million, tax-free, was to be made to the public library and the community college skilled trades program in my husband George's name. A gasp from Robert. That was a serious bite out of the principal.
Third, the remainder of the estate would be placed into the Vance Family Trust. And here was the kicker. For the rest of my life, I had full control. Upon my passing, Arthur would serve as trustee. They would not get their inheritance as a lump sum. They would each receive a modest but comfortable annual stipend, enough to live on, but not enough to fund Robert's stock market gambling or Susan's lifestyle. To access any additional funds from the trust principal, they had to meet a series of conditions to be reviewed annually by Arthur. Robert had to take a mandatory, unplugged, 4-week family vacation every year. If Arthur saw so much as a single email sent from his phone during that time, his stipend for the next quarter would be suspended. Susan had to perform 200 hours of genuine, off-camera, unhashtagable volunteer work for a charity of her choice. A real one, not her own foundation for feral cats. She had to provide a signed letter from the charity's director attesting to her work. And Michael, my sweet, lost Michael, had to get a real, full-time job with a W-2 and benefits, and he had to hold it for 1 full year before he could even apply for a distribution from the trust. And once he did, Dad's old convertible would be his. The house, the furniture, the good china, it all remained mine to do with as I wished. When Arthur finished reading, there was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the shocked silence of before. It was a heavy, thoughtful silence. They had been so prepared for war, for total victory or total defeat. They had never considered the possibility of structured accountability. I hadn't disinherited them. I had given them a roadmap back to being decent human beings. Over the next few months, things began to change, slowly, painfully at first. Robert fought the vacation clause until his wife, Pamela, of all people, told him to shut up and pack his bags, that it was the best idea she'd ever heard. They went to a lake house and actually talked to each other. Susan found a soup kitchen to volunteer at. The first few weeks, she complained constantly. But then she started telling me stories about the people she met. Real stories about real people. Her Instagram posts became a little less frequent and a little more real. And Michael, bless his heart, got a job teaching art at the local high school. He discovered that he loved teaching teenagers how to throw pots more than he ever loved selling his art at sad little craft fairs. He was good at it. For the first time, he seemed truly proud of himself. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We still have our disagreements, but the panicked, grasping greed is gone, replaced by something quieter, something that feels just a little bit like respect. A couple of weeks ago, my doorbell rang. It was Michael. He didn't have any laundry. He was just holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner downtown. "Just thought you might like some company, Mom," he said, giving me a slightly shy, genuine smile. We sat on the porch swing for an hour, drinking our coffee, watching the cars go by, and not talking about anything important at all. It was the biggest inheritance I could have ever asked for. So, that's my story. It was never really about the money. It was about reminding my children that a family isn't a corporation or an audience or a support system for your own ambitions. It's supposed to be a safe harbor. It took a ridiculous, convoluted, and somewhat cruel plan to get them to see it, but I think they're finally starting to remember how to sail. What do you all think? Was I a genius or a crazy old coot? And more importantly, what wild and wonderful clause would you put in your will to keep your own family on their toes? Let me know in the comments below. It has been an absolute pleasure sharing this with you all.
So, another story of my grandmother has sent, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.